Hello everybody, welcome back to Artisan X, a resource hub for developers of X-Plane aircraft. If you're looking for information and resources regarding X-Plane aircraft development, you are in the right place. Module 4, Development and Production. This is the start of the fourth module of a 5-module series focusing on developing X-Plane aircraft. These modules are available on the Artisan X project pages located at www.artisansimulation.com. Select the Artisan X menu item to see the full set of online resources for new and existing developers. Now, let's dive into today's topic. Development and production. As you can see, this is the heart of aircraft development and is comprised of a number of steps. Briefly going through them, we're going to make a flight model using X-Plane's Plane Maker. Then we'll turn our focus to 3D modeling and animation using Blender. And then we'll put some art and texturing on those models using Substance Painter and GIMP. Then we will leave the visual elements and go into the world of plug-in programming using C++ and sound engineering, putting the noises and all of the clicks and buzzes that make the airplane come to life. Then we'll take a look at the license and security issues that you'll need to be aware of. And lastly, we'll go into testing and quality control where we make sure the aircraft looks, behaves, and performs like the real deal. So let's get started. Welcome to part 1 of our tutorial on X-Plane's Plane Maker. Alright then, we're finally ready to start making our aircraft. To begin with, let's look at this file structure that we're going to set up to keep a handle on all the different parts of the plane development cycle and all the various pieces. I have mine in my documents folder under X-Plane aircraft development folder where I list each plane I'm working on. In this case, we're in the Grumman GA7. And then I have a couple files that I'll start with right away. The Blender file will be where we put our 3D models for the plane that we'll actually see when we fly the plane. GIMP is a place for doing some basic artwork on 2D art assets. The Grumman GA7 is actually the aircraft folder that will eventually end up in X-Plane. I have my reference folder, and then I have a folder also for Substance Painter. We'll get into the Blender and Substance Painter and GIMP folders later, but for right now, let's take a look in our reference folder. In here, you'll see I have a couple things. A lot of the pictures that I've gotten downloaded from the web that just give me ideas of what the airplane should look like, as well as some close-ups of some very detailed areas, such as a wheel or a luggage compartment, just so I can make sure I have those details right when it gets time to model them. As I see these, I'll just try to save those pictures into this folder so I have them for when I need them. But for right now, the first document that we really want to take a look at is going to be your best friend during the whole development process of the airplane, and that's the pilot's operating handbook. If you can get this for your aircraft for the model year that you're trying to develop, this will greatly ease what you need to know. And once you get that, when you open it, you'll end up with a document that is usually a couple hundred pages long, but it contains a lot of detail. My suggestion is to skim through the entire manual. Make sure you understand what's in there, because as you're doing different parts of your development work, you'll be able to say, I know I've seen that somewhere, and chances are it'll have been in this document. So the first place we're going to look in this is to get a good idea of what the airplane should look like from a 3D perspective. The drawings that they put in here aren't perfect, but they're way closer than almost anything you're going to get from any other source. So it's a good place to start to try to get an idea of what the plane should look like. Occasionally, you'll also find these 3D views as a separate image available on the web. Sometimes those are a little cleaner. They'll look something like this, where you actually just get a nice line drawing of the aircraft. If you have these, this is the best place to start. We're going to take these pictures and then just take pieces of them to develop some basic outline photos that we'll use, such as a top view, like this. We're just looking for the fuselage in that picture, a side view of the fuselage, as well as the tail, and other photos as well that you'll see as we go through the area. When you see drawings like this, as we're pulling them up, this is where I get them. I use GIMP to just cut out the piece I need and scale it to a size that seems like it'll work for what we're doing. For X-Plane, you can use both JPEGs and bitmaps. Other photo styles may work, but I know a lot of them don't, so those two seem to be safe to use. Besides the just the shaping here that we'd have as we go to start developing our model, you also notice that there's some nice detail in this as far as the exact length of the aircraft on some key dimensions, and that'll help us in our scaling as we're going through as well. In this case, you'll see our aircraft is 29 feet and 8 inches long, tip to tip, top of the tail to front of the nose. Another section that we're going to be wanting to look at as we're going through, just as a quick reference, would be some basic airspeed limitations, weights, balances, and other performance characteristics like that. Those will come into play in our next video, but this manual is just chock full of all sorts of details of things that you would want to know to try to make sure that you're modeling the aircraft as close to the real thing as you can. So with those two items in line, let's go ahead and start opening up our PlaneMaker and X-Plane to begin the design process of the 3D model that we won't see when we're actually flying the airplane in its finished form, but is the one that X-Plane uses to determine all the flight characteristics. So I'm going to move this out of the way for a second, and they'll be back. And I'm going to go to my X-Plane 12 directory, and you'll notice there's a file in here called PlaneMaker. PlaneMaker is where we're going to start making this aircraft. It's where it first comes to life. To double click on it to open it, or since you're going to be using this quite a bit, you could go ahead and right click on it and pin it to the taskbar. That way it's there when you need it with one click, and you're not always searching for it and having to scroll through the files to get it. So again, we'll put that away for now, and I'm going to go ahead and click on my taskbar and open up PlaneMaker for X-Plane. As you see, when you first open it up, you have a default aircraft. It's a tube. This is just a basic shape to start with, and we'll give you a quick run around of this menu fairly quickly here, and then as we go through and look at the different sections, it'll begin to make a lot more sense. You want to make sure you're using the version of PlaneMaker that's relevant for the X-Plane version you're running. In this case, we're running X-Plane 12, so I've got PlaneMaker 12 that's up to date with the latest release. And you can check that, of course, in your About folder here. That gives you the information on which version it is, and make sure that you're there. If you run your updater for X-Plane, you'll find it there as well. There's a file section that has new, open, so you can open other planes as you're going, and to quit. And then you'll have your list of your standard items that we're going to be going through to develop the airplane. All of these different menu items have either graphical or numerical or data-driven modeling aspects of the airplane. Some specialty areas are under the expert area. So for instance, if you have a VTOL or helicopter controls, they'll be over here. And then you have some basic views, so you can look at it from the top, from the front, which in this case you can't see because it's just a flat circle right now, but we'll keep it on the side view for now. If I hit my space bar, you'll notice I'll get a wireframe view of the model as it would stand. So this is a wireframe view, and this is a solid view of the model that will be used inside of X-Plane to have the airflow over the body and the wings and everything to actually determine the handling characteristics of your airplane. Unlike other flight simulators, this model is responsible for a good deal of how the airplane is going to behave, and you'll understand that as we go through this model. And the last area here are some special areas that, again, we'll go through some of these to look at. There's smoothing bodies and just some basic cleanup information in here that you can look for as well. To start with, we're going to go a little out of order, and then we'll look at the bodies section here first. So once we finish the body section, we will go back and go through the rest of this menu pretty much straight down the line off of it to finish out building the plane. So basically by the time you get down to the bottom, you're pretty close to being done on the airplane. A couple passes around to make sure you're cleaning up all the details. But to start with, we really would like to start getting something that really begins to look like an airplane. So we're going to go into the tab that says Bodies. And in here, you'll see a couple things. First of all, the actual 3D model becomes annoying when you're in this view and starts flashing. I'd go ahead and just hit it to be in the wireframe. It's a little less annoying that way. I wish it didn't do this, but that's what they decided needs to be done. I guess it makes sense if you're working on a complex model and you're trying to figure out which piece of the body you're actually working on. In this case, we're going to start with the fuselage. And in this area, we're only going to have one fuselage. You could imagine if you had a twin fuselage airplane, you'd have body 1 and body 2, and you may be adding other parts to very esoteric airplanes that have a less conventional shape on it. So we're going to be sticking with just body 1 for this. And then this is our section view, and here you can see for each of these lines, This is that line in a 3D view looking from the front. So this is kind of a way to look at it in 2 dimensions at one time. It starts to give you a better idea of what's going on. There's also then the tabs here that will let you look at from the model from the top. And because it's a cylinder right now, they all look the same. Side, bottom, these all look the same right now because we have just a cylinder, and front and back is giving you just this view right here. And these little points here are points that you can take, grab, and move around as you need to, and we'll get into more of that here in just a second. So we're going to go back to the section view and look at what we have on here. For this airplane right now, the default gives you 6 of these sections to go through. Depending on how complex your fuselage is, you may want to have more than 6 sections. You can add at least a dozen, probably more sections to an airplane if you need them. You'll notice so that the ones that have been added are all a little point at area 0. So this spacing here on these numbers on this row above them says this one is at 0 feet, this is at 2 feet, let's just call it feet for now, 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet. So if we wanted this one to go to 12 feet, I could go and click this little up arrow, and you'll see now that I've moved that section to 12 feet out, and it's now right here. So as you're going through this, you would want to make sure that you have your rings spaced out in a way that makes sense for your aircraft, and eventually you're going to zero these into being the exact length of the fuselage that you're making. So in our drawing before we were looking at, we had the pictures in here that gave us the tip to tail tip length. So we would want to make sure we're kind of just short of that by whatever amount it is to this point of the fuselage here. So from the tip of the nose to the back of the fuselage would be the length that we look at. So we're going to be right around 29 feet for that. What I would actually do for this is take this drawing and then in GIMP scale it up and then measure the difference between those two and use that difference measurement in pixels to kind of convert this to be the exact length. You'll see that I've done that in a little bit. So we're going to just keep that behind there for now. So the first thing we're going to try to do to start doing this is we need to know what shape we're trying to get to. And as I showed before, we can take the drawing like this, pull out the section that's in this case, let's look at the side view first. This side view here, take the picture of this and import it into here. So I'm going to go into here, go to my aircraft, documents, explain development, references, and go to side and bring that in. And now you'll see I have a side view of my aircraft. Now I can use the plus and minus keys to actually change the relative scale of the two areas. So the first thing that I would do if I'm just starting from scratch and intending to use this one is, let's just say that we're going to go back down to just having these 7 segments. From the side, then I'm going to scale this so those 7 segments now are exactly as long as my plane. And on the side here, you can see we have the same area there. Now what we can do to start this is, let's say that we decide that we want this the center one here to line up right at the center of the nose. And all of these are going to be moved to be very close to where we are. So we're really going to take all of these sections and move them in. Remember, we're just working at 2D space right now. So we're just moving the vertical distancing, so they're all pretty close to being the same. Now you'll notice in this 3D modeling area, it's a pretty crude modeling system. So what we can do to look at this now, if we go in here, you'll see it's we've flattened this out to kind of a wiggly little line in there. What I can do to start to clean it up is, first of all, I can reset this section to vertical, so now they're all lined up in line vertically, so horizontally they're all in the same space. And then if I go to the top, you'll see now that if I go and pick up the top background image, by scrolling down here and picking up that, I now have this image as well. You see, and I can pull these in here as well, and you're beginning to see now that we're getting into an area. If I reset this to vertical, go back to the side, set this to vertical again, We go back to our sections chart here. You'll see we're getting closer to what we would want. But if I click on that, I get an actual pinpoint. So the first trick here is that if you click in an area, you'll get it to actually snap into the place for that. Now if I go to the top and to the side, you'll see I'm lined up pretty close there. So then we'll take the next one. Let's just say we want to go right about here. And now we're not going to pull them all into the same spot. We're going to start to let them move out to where they should be to start to form this shape. And again, this is not the most intuitive or the way I would necessarily want to do a 3D, but it's the way that X-Plane's been doing it for a long time. So I'm going to reset this to vertical just to neaten it up. I'm going to go to the top and pull them into the same section. And I'm just going to get them close. I kind of like to clean it up. And now if I go to the section view, it's like, oh, that's pretty ugly. That's not really what I want. What I can do is click the O, and you'll see that it smooths it out into a nice kind of shape there. If I go back to the top, you'll see it kind of pushed them out some. This is just when it does that smoothing, it kind of goes. So this is a lot of back and forth as you're going in here. I'll do that. I'll hit O again. Now it's a little smaller. I believe it should be. No, we're going to just be playing with it here for a while. So what we're going to do to keep it from snapping back so much, just go to this one, and this one way out here is probably the one causing it. I really want it to be more round. So I can grab each of these little tiny pixels here, move them close, and then smooth them out by hitting my O. And now you have a nice smooth area there. If I go back to here, you'll see I'm pretty much lined up on that area. On my side view, I'm pretty much lined up on the area. So that gives us a pretty close approximation of where that is. And then you would just keep doing this down the entire airplane until you get to where you want to be. And you'll see here as I'm moving this in, it's beginning to get the shape. Now, you'll be tempted to want to make this exact the whole way through, but I'm going to let you know right now, this is nowhere near that critical. It needs to be close, but if it's a little squared off, and you'll see here in a minute as we advance this, it'll be okay. You don't need to have it exact. You're just trying to get the shape to be very close to what you would want it to be for the airflow. Beyond a certain point, you're just spending more time doing something that's not visible and really isn't going to impact how it flies. So again, we'll kind of clear those up. And you'll start to get the idea of how to set this up. Now you can do this the whole way through and go from the top and the side, and then eventually from the front and back when you get to the end of the airplane. If you start looking at front views of airplanes, a lot of times they're kind of squared off on the bottom and rounded on the top. So you'll be moving these around. And if we hit the space here, you can start to see that the airplane will start to take the shape that you want it to have on there. Now, one thing that's a little weird, I'm working on Windows, and you have this adjust heading and roll. Those should work on the W, A, S, and D keys, and it does in both Linux and on the Mac versions of Playmaker. But here in X-Plane on Windows, for some reason, those functions are missing. So you kind of have to just stuck with the 3D views and work with them. You can go and say adjust heading and click these once at a time, but it's going to move it just a little, very little bit, and be really kind of difficult to move around, but it kind of can be done. So we're going to go back to our side view, and you'll see here that as we're moving these lines around, it really changes the shape of the airplane quite a bit. If we go back to our section here, you'll see that now this one is beginning to get that shape with the flat bottom. Of course, this is way too big for this section, so I might be pulling these up and in some as we're going and working between this view and that last view to get this where it really should be. And we want to round that out and then just pull that one over a little bit and this one down a little further to flatten that out. And that's giving me a pretty good close shape of what we need there. That gives you an idea of where we're going as we're walking through the airplane here and sort of taking vertical slices of it and going through. And this airplane here, you'll see that you do have that kind of horseshoe shape of the fuselage. That's at its widest part. Obviously, is more rounded on the front. And really, if you want to get an idea of what shapes are where, that's where you're going to really need to start going into pictures like this and figuring out, okay, this flat bottom goes pretty much all the way up to the top in this aircraft. As a flat area, it only really rounds off the last little bit at the nose, and there's kind of a hump to the nose going that way. So I know that Eventually, when I get this done, it should look something close to this, where I've got a fairly flat deck with a bit of rounding on it, and it kind of turns 90 degrees with a soft bend, and it goes down straight, and then it goes back in at a 90-degree bend at a hard 90-degree bend at the end. And if you just start looking at enough different airplane pictures of your model, you'll start to get the idea of, okay, that's actually pretty sharp there, so we can expect to see it. It should look like that. So you could go through and do this and figure out how many of these you need, and be changing these values as you're going along to get to the point where you have the detail you want and the number of sections that you want. And the footage out here will be 29 feet. Basically, you'd be to 29 on the last one on it. Doing this from this part, as you can see, is very tedious. There is no shortcut to this. Unfortunately, it's what it is. But there is one trick that I've learned that you can do. If we go back to our section, and we're going to say import body from aircraft, and I'm going to go into the airplanes that are in here. And I know, just in general, I've got a twin-engined general aircraft that has 4 seats in it. That's kind of close to a Beechcraft Baron 8. If I go into here and I look at the aircraft.acf file for the Baron, if I select that to import it and open it, you'll see I'll get a very nicely done fuselage. And as it turns out, these aircraft are pretty close. It's 28 feet long. That's pretty close to being where I need to be for this. I might need to move that out just a little bit, so I could make this one 29 feet and this one maybe 28, and we'll see how it goes from there. And now you'll notice the airplane disappeared. So there's one thing we need to do now. We need to go into Expert, go into Invisible Parts, and you'll see here body 1, turn it back on. It turned it off. And now you'll see we have the Baron aircraft as our model, the fuselage for the Baron aircraft. So we imported that one. Well, we're not doing a Baron, we're doing this, but they're pretty close. But now if I go into bodies and I go to the side, I use the plus and minus to get this there. You'll see I'm starting from a much closer position than I was. I can use left and right arrows and plus and minus and up and down to line this up to what I need. And you'll see now I can start to use this one to really get in there without having to do nearly as much work. So I'm going to just move these to where I'm going, and then I know if I move the middle one to about there, when I hit this reset to vertical, it's based off the middle ones. You'll see they'll snap to where it was. And now my tweaking is a lot easier, and I'm using the expertise of the X-Plane people about where the detail needs to be and where I can have big long pieces that don't matter for this flight model. Remember, this is for the flight model. If I go back to the section, you'll see that I've got a good basic state shape off of that. I do know, for instance, that the airplane I'm looking at is not quite as rounded on the bottom, so I'll need to go through this and pretty much square off these bottoms, and that'll start to help me go through. And I'll keep moving these. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward to a finished version of this so you can see where I ended up off of that. All I'm really doing at this point is just trying to get the base fuselage in there. You'll notice that I'm not changing any of these other areas yet. We'll get into that as we're going. But this gives us a good place to start on the body of the aircraft for what we need to start creating our aircraft. So I am now going to close the bodies. I can go to File and then save this as, and now I would go to my Documents folder, Explain Aircraft Development, Grumman GA7, and this again is the file folder I'm going to use as my default folder that will have the aircraft files that eventually will be the aircraft I install into the aircraft folder in Explain. And I'm going to save it here as the Grumman G7.aircraft. Hit save, type in that name, it'll save it to use. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to overwrite the one I have. Instead, I'm going to open. I don't want to save this version. It was just a demo. I'm going to go to my Documents, Explain Aircraft GA7. Make this so picking up that folder. And now you'll see I have a model in here that is got kind of partially done. I'm going to go over to Invisible Parts and show them just the plane maker parts. So here's our fuselage, and you'll see in this version I've got some wings and engine nacelles and wheels and everything on it. We'll get to those bits in a moment, but you'll notice here my aircraft fuselage, if I go down to miscellaneous bodies and look at the fuselage, it's pretty basic, and you'll notice that I've got it shaped out, and if I get the scaling right for it again, it's doing a pretty good job of gathering the basic up and down keys left and right, plus and minus, to get it pretty close to being the shape I need for the aircraft. And if I'm looking at it, it looks fairly smooth. So I know that once I'm to this point, here's the top view, and again, I've got it going pretty close to what I need it to be for the shape of the airplane. The bottom is also shaped pretty much the way it needs to be, and the front and back has that shape that I've kind of worked through. And as I'm looking from the front, you can kind of see how these work out. This is just kind of a good way to know where this one should be based on like the shape of this cross section right there, kind of cutting right through this section. That's about the way I imagine it would look. And again, we're not trying to be perfect with this one. Just get it pretty close enough that it's going to make a shape that'll cut through the air correctly. The fuselage especially is kind of just the mass of it, and the general its pointy nose is going to take care of most of it. Obviously the wings and the engines and other things are going to be a lot more defining of the characteristics of the plane, where you need to make sure that you're going right. So if we close this, you'll see again now that we have the fuselage. If I go from the top for it, you'll see it's got that basic shape. It's a little squared off, but again, if it's good enough for laminars and airs, I figure they're giving us the idea of the kind of level of detail you need for the flight simulator to work the way it should off of that fuselage section there. So that is our first section. We've saved it. If I close this, I can go ahead and save it and close it. You'll notice the next time I open up this, I will get the airplane back. Because I have more parts on this, it's a little farther ahead than I am on my tutorial right now. I'm going to go back to just showing the parts of Plane Maker, and literally if I wanted to, I can turn off the parts that are on the airplane. Back to the side view, and now we have a basic fuselage. When you go to save this, I will note you'll get a couple of pop-up boxes saying that there's some the plane's not flyable yet. There's some speeds that are missing and values that aren't properly set. That's normal at this point. You really haven't defined the airplane at all yet for the X-plane to be able to do anything with the model. Right now it's just kind of a shape, and there's no definition to it at all about what's going on with the airplane. We'll get in that a little bit more in the next one and get those values in that should quiet down how much it's complaining about what's going on. But your first section is to just get the fuselage portion of what we're showing right now into X-plane, and get that saved and know how to bring it back up and understand how our menu system works and how we use these body shapes to try to make sure that we're getting the fuselage shape correctly. You'll see we have 11 sections, stations with 7 dots or changing points in each. We're using about a 3-foot diameter, and the other ones are the default areas in here for the coefficient and drag of everything are close to where we're at. And you'll notice here that when we're done on this, when I actually did the math, we're at 27.3 feet, which would be the about approximate area where that ends versus the end of the tail on its slant back that we have on there. So again, that gives us sort of our first piece of the airplane that we're looking at of the fuselage. We've saved it, and we're on our way. So with that, we will end this first tutorial on using Plane Maker, and on the next one, as I said, we'll start going through the rest of this menu, start filling in some of the details of some of the parameters that we need to have in there to keep it to quit yelling at us. But I always like starting off just getting the plane done correctly for the fuselage, so I sort of have a plane there to start using and basing everything else off of. So with that, we're going to thank you for your time, and we'll see you in the next video.